The recent trend of adapting and readapting old Stephen King properties to the big screen has had mixed results. The film adaptation of King's Dark Tower series was less than well received, to put it lightly. However, in contrast, the most recent King adaptation, It, is garnering high praise from critics and King fans alike. We can only hope It marks the beginning of more King adaptations that actually do their source material justice. But if you've already seen It and can't wait for Chapter 2, or the very King-esque series Stranger Things to premiere this Halloween, or even the new King-inspired series Castle Rock to premiere next year, I've got you covered for watching material in the meantime. In this video, I will list 8 film recommendations that fans of It will enjoy. Probably. While these recommendations definitely differ in story, they touch on similar themes and ideas. Meaning, for the most part, they follow a group of kids or young people who uncover an evil in their otherwise humdrum community, and must conquer their own fears in order to face it. I'm going to exclude films that focus too much on adventure or sci-fi, like The Goonies or E.T., and instead focus on films that have a clear horror element. Films with adult protagonists are also out, but high school age is an acceptable cutoff for this list. And I'm omitting any direct Stephen King adaptations, as those are a bit obvious for people that like a King-adapted movie. Keep in mind, these are in chronological order, not ranked from worst to best. So let's get started.
When you're down here with me,
You float down!
If you thought you knew what kind of list this was going to be, think again. We are starting in the pre-80s and about as far from New England as you can get. The 1977 Japanese film, Hausa, not to be confused with the 1985 American film, House, follows a group of young girls who decide to spend their high school vacation at a remote house in the country, owned by Gorgeous's aunt. Yes, Gorgeous is this girl's name. However, shortly after they arrive at the house, they begin to notice strange, and I mean very strange, occurrences that seem to be linked to the mysterious aunt and her freaky feline with glowing eyes.
Ara?
The tone of Hausa is probably further from It than any other entry on this list, but it does focus on a group of young students who must face a strange and mysterious evil entity that plays on their own fears. Like Pennywise, the demonic forces in Hausa are completely unpredictable and very, very weird. While Hausa isn't exactly scary, it is at the very least a totally unique, surreal, and oddly disturbing experience. Next on the list, we have the less than classic adaptation of a classic Ray Bradbury novel. The 1983 film Something Wicked This Way Comes begins with a narration by an older Will Holloway, who recalls one October during his youth in the 1930s. Will and his friend Jim learn of a strange carnival coming to their quaint Illinois town, led by the mysterious Mr. Dark, and begin to suspect that something wicked their way comes. When Will and Jim spy on the carnival and witness some supernatural activity, they begin to understand the evil purpose behind the carnival and why it is seducing the town's residents with promises of renewed youth and fulfilled desires. But Mr. Dark soon learns the boys are onto his scheme and attempts to eliminate them before they can expose the dark secrets of his carnival. As with It, the villains in Something Wicked This Way Comes feed on their victims' emotions and play into their insecurities. However, unlike Pennywise, Mr. Dark and his minions are more seducers than frighteners. While Will and Jim are the protagonists of the story, this story delves quite a bit into the psychology of adults with long-standing regrets and grievances, whereas the story of It focuses mainly on the psychology of children, at least in Chapter 1. The film adaptation of Something Wicked This Way Comes suffered from the studio swapping directors and over-editing, and thus has some real pacing and story structure issues. However, its 58% Rotten Tomatoes score may have more to do with the fact that it's an adaptation of a classic novel and doesn't quite live up to the full potential of that novel. This seems a bit unfair if you judge this movie simply as a standalone film, as it does have some great moments and performances, and at the very least, evokes the spooky atmosphere of the classic American horror tale it was based on.
45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 52. You're lost!
I wanted to avoid straightforward slasher flicks for this list, but when you think about it, the prominent supernatural elements in the 1984 film A Nightmare on Elm Street, as well as the creative ways that its villain, Freddy Krueger, draws on his victims' inner fear, definitely parallel it in some ways. A Nightmare on Elm Street begins inside the nightmare of Tina, who is being pursued by an apparent burn victim with a glove of knives. I think every kid had the plastic version of that glove in the 80s, even if they hadn't seen this movie, but I digress. After waking, Tina tells her friends, Nancy, Glenn, and her douchey boyfriend Rod, about the nightmare. And in order to console her, the group spend the night at Tina's house while her parents are away. However, Tina dreams of the knife-handed psychopath again, and this time she is killed, both in her dreams and in reality. The murder is pinned on Rod, but Nancy knows there is more going on. She's dreamed of the creepy burn victim called Freddy as well, and knows it's up to her and Glenn to make a stand against Freddy.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Like the original Halloween and Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic, must-see film for anyone interested in horror, and especially the slasher subgenre. Because Freddy Krueger has become so iconic over the years, and this film's 8 sequels, it's easy to forget how unique he was at the time of the original film's release. His ability to draw from and feed off his victims' fear made him a unique entity in the horror genre, and clearly a trendsetter. In fact, A Nightmare on Elm Street predates the publication of the It novel by 2 years, so Freddy may have even been a slight influence on King's Pennywise. I'm not really saying he was, I'm just saying.
I'm crazy after all.
The 1987 film The Gate is one of those films that often gets overlooked in lists or articles about cult movies from the 80s. But it really shouldn't. It may have suffered from being a movie marketed for kids that was actually too scary for kids to watch, and on the other hand, not scary enough for adults. But despite existing in a sort of marketing limbo, this film is worth checking out purely for its creative nightmare imagery and dark humor. The story follows a typical 80s every kid, Glenn, his older sister Alexandra, and his geeky heavy metal obsessed BFF, Terry. When lightning destroys a tree in Glenn's backyard, he and Terry discover a strange hole left in its wake, and a large geode within it. Glenn and Terry crack open the geode, unwittingly unleashing demonic forces upon themselves, Alexandra, and her annoying friends who are over for a party. Luckily, Terry has read all about these particular demons in the liner notes of his favorite heavy metal record, and if the group can stick together and follow the lyrical instructions, they might have a chance to send the demons back through the portal from whence they came.
Hi.
Admittedly, this film can get very cheesy at times, and there are also some major plot holes in the third act. But the film is enjoyable despite these flaws. The Gate seems to capture a childlike mentality regarding fear, much in the same way that Pennywise does. For instance, dark heavy metal lyrics and dead bodies hidden in walls are both things that probably haunted my nightmares as a kid, so seeing them on screen captures a kind of creepy nostalgia, much like It does.
It's the work, man. I just made it up.
I said I wouldn't include The Goonies because it is too much adventure and not enough horror, but this next recommendation is pretty much The Goonies with monsters, so I think it qualifies. The 1987 film The Monster Squad follows a group of kids in a secret club dedicated to the study of and defense against monsters. Their hobby turns out to be very useful when they discover that real monsters, led by a very Lugosi-esque Count Dracula, are terrorizing their home city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. With some help from an old creepy German guy who knows a lot about monsters, and Frankenstein's monster, they must face off with Dracula and his army of classic movie monsters in order to save their city and the world.
Wolfman's got nards!
There are some clear similarities between the Monster Squad and It, the most obvious being that it falls on a group of nerdy kids in a club to defend their community against evil. But I should note that the Monster Squad is much more kid-friendly than It. This was one of those movies on a regular rental rotation during my childhood, but but I don't think I ever found it truly scary even back then. I did, however, think it was cool as all hell, and I wanted a bow with wooden stake arrows so bad. I'm sure adults won't find this film scary at all, and probably quite cheesy by today's standards. But if you can embrace your inner nerdy kid who's obsessed with movie monsters, you will have a lot of fun with this movie. On that level, the Monster Squad delivers big time.
Fat kid, good job.
My name is Horace.
Like The Gate, this next recommendation is an unfairly overlooked gem, at least in the category of scary movies for kids. And like The Gate, it may have suffered from being a bit too scary for its target audience. The 1988 film, Lady in White, follows Frankie, who is your typical nerdy, aspiring writer growing up in a small American town in the 60s. When bullies lock Frankie in the cloakroom of his school on Halloween night, he witnesses a spectral replay of a young girl's murder, and then is discovered by the killer himself. After narrowly surviving his own attempted murder, Frankie attempts to solve a string of child murders that have occurred in the town, including that of the young girl who now haunts him, and discover the connection between the murders and the mysterious specter who haunts the cliffs, known as the Lady in White.
What's the matter? Afraid the Lady in White will get you? No.
Although Lady in White focuses mainly on one protagonist, Frankie does have some help from his older brother Gino, and a bit from the bullies, who he eventually befriends, making the supernatural detective work a bit of a group effort, as it is in It. The spooky specters in this story don't resemble Pennywise at all. However, like It, Lady in White draws heavily from the kind of ghost stories we remember from our childhood. There is a very campfire story-like vibe to this film that adds a unique, spooky texture to what might otherwise be an average murder mystery.
Guys? Guys?
Next, we have the only animated entry on this list. I didn't say they had to be live action. The 2009 stop-motion film adaptation of Neil Gaiman's novel, Coraline, is about a young girl who everyone calls Caroline, although her name is Coraline. The story begins when Coraline's family moves to the remote Pink Palace Apartments on the outskirts of Ashland, Oregon. Because Coraline's parents are always busy writing a gardening magazine, they don't have much time for their daughter, and Coraline must amuse herself by wandering around the grounds and interacting with the building's eccentric tenants. One night, Coraline discovers a small doorway in the apartment that leads to another mirror version of the apartment. To her surprise, this apartment is occupied by doubles of her parents. Well, they would be doubles if it weren't for their sewn-on button eyes. These other parents turn out to be far more fun than her real parents. That is, until Coraline begins to uncover the horrible truth behind the other mother and the false world she has created.
Shouldn't the old well be here?
Nothing out here. It's the empty part of this world.
Coraline is another movie that focuses mainly on one protagonist, rather than a group, although Coraline does have some help from the nerdy kid that lives in the building, Wybie, and of course, a talking cat. The main similarity between Coraline and It is the villain. The other mother, aka the Beldam, is similar to Pennywise in some ways. However, while Pennywise draws on his victims' fear, the Beldam seduces them with their inner desires. Much like the carnival in Something Wicked This Way Comes, only even more creepy.
I'll give you to the count of 3. 1, 2, 3!
Okay, granted, the 2011 film Super 8 may be the most obvious choice on this list for fans of It, or even Stranger Things. You have to give J.J. Abrams some credit for repopularizing many of the tropes we missed so much from the 80s.
What?
Okay, fine, late 70s. Same difference. The story follows a group of young aspiring filmmakers who become drawn into a real-life sci-fi horror movie when they happen to catch an epic train crash and the creature that emerges from that crash on Super 8 film. When the kids develop the film and see evidence of the creature, they realize it's up to them to save their town. Not only from the mysterious creature, but also the corrupt military forces attempting to capture the creature at any cost.
They will kill you. Do not speak of this.
If you've seen Super 8, you might accuse me of breaking my own rules here, as this film clearly has some prominent sci-fi influences. However, unlike E.T., Super 8 delves just as much into the horror genre as it does the sci-fi, especially when the creature is terrorizing the town. Like It and Stranger Things, Super 8 is a fun homage to films of the late 70s and 80s that use similar themes and tropes. And if you're a fan of It and Stranger Things, but haven't seen Super 8, this film was custom made for you.
Guys, this is gonna be great!
Those are my 8 movie recommendations for people that liked It, not including other Stephen King adaptations, of course. If you've seen all these already and are still looking for more viewing material, here are 10 more movies worth watching that share themes with It, but either weren't close enough to it or didn't quite fit the criteria for this list.
We weren't doing anything. We were just messing up.
They're here.
You deserve to die, boy.
It's a pretty cool place. If you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
Chucky's a doll. He's made of plastic and stuffing. Look at him, look at him.
Something I think you'll like.
Three sharp knocks.
Ba-ba-ba-duk-duk-duk.
If you'd like to recommend movies for fans of It that I didn't include in this video, please do so in the comments below. And let me know what you liked or didn't like about It. Please like the vid and subscribe for more creepy, King-esque content. Until next time.